Imagine waking up and, like, before your eyes are even fully open, your brain just loads a game over screen.
Oh, man.
Right. Like your face is sticky, your breathing feels totally shallow, and your mind is immediately, and I mean violently, assaulted by, I don't know, 50 terrifying thoughts about everything you failed to do yesterday.
Just an absolute avalanche of guilt before you've even had a sip of water.
Exactly. And for a lot of people, especially those navigating things like ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, this isn't some rare nightmare. It's literally just Tuesday morning. You aren't starting a fresh day. You're already losing a race that, well, it began before you even regained consciousness.
And you're starting in the negative.
Totally. So today we are taking a deep dive into this highly personal, really meticulously documented source text that dissects this exact phenomenon. We're going to map out the neurological friction of waking up overwhelmed.
And more importantly, we're going to look at the practical systems the author engineered to bypass their own neurobiology. Because it's fascinating.
It really is. So let's jump right into the framework the author uses, because they revolve it around this concept they call bumps and dents.
Right, the bumps and dents, I love this framing so much.
Yeah.
So the bumps are essentially our cognitive peaks, right? The hyperfocus, the unique problem-solving capabilities, those intense passions.
Like the superpowers almost.
Exactly, yeah. But then you have the dents, and these are the systemic vulnerabilities, things like sensory overload, executive dysfunction, or just the friction of daily transitions.
Like waking up.
Like waking up.
Yeah.
And while this source is explicitly a neurodivergent narrative, it's a masterclass in environmental design for anyone. Because, we all have days where our internal processor is running way too hot.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And learning how to offload that mental burden into our physical environment, that's just a universally applicable skill.
It really is. Everyone's got their own bumps and dents,
Right. So, okay, let's unpack the initial morning state. Because the visual the author paints is just staggering. They describe waking up to what they call the after image of yesterday.
That phrase is so haunting. The after image of yesterday.
It really is. Like, if you open your eyes and the very first optical input your brain gets is a chaotic, messy room, it feels like loading up a saved video game where your character is already, like, mid-fall into a pit of spikes.
They're just instantly dying.
Exactly. You don't get a clean slate. You are physically and psychologically dragged backward into yesterday's unfinished business.
And medically speaking, the phrase after image of yesterday is a brilliant articulation of how visual processing impacts cognitive load.
How so?
Well, when you wake up, your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for, sequencing tasks and regulating emotion, it's essentially booting up.
Like an old computer trying to connect to the internet.
Right, exactly. So if the immediate visual data it receives is a stack of dirty dishes or clothes just strewn all over the floor, the brain doesn't just see objects.
What does it see?
It sees unfulfilled obligations. It processes that clutter as a direct threat to your limited daily energy reserves.
Oh, wow. A threat.
Yeah, because the very first action required of you in your new day is basically a remediation task from your old day. It creates this paralyzing chicken or egg paradox in the mind.
That paradox is what traps people, right? Like, am I starting today or am I still paying off the debt of yesterday?
Precisely.
And blurring those lines instantly triggers an anxiety cascade. You haven't even brushed your teeth yet, but you're already carrying this heavy dread that today is going to be a carbon copy of yesterday's failures.
And the text makes it very clear that this isn't purely psychological either. The physical manifestations are agonizing.
Yeah, they detail the sensation of a sticky face or this disturbing feeling that their lungs just aren't drawing enough oxygen.
Plus the acute radiating discomfort from how they slept.
Right. And this is where I think we really need to look at the sensory side of things, right?
Yeah, we have to talk about interoception and sensory gating, which are heavily, heavily impacted in autism spectrum disorder.
Interoception being like feeling your own heartbeat, that sort of thing.
Exactly. It's your brain's ability to perceive physical sensations inside your body. And for someone with heightened sensory processing, the filters that normally dull baseline physical discomfort, they're just entirely absent.
So they feel everything at a 10.
Exactly. A neurotypical brain might register a slightly dry mouth or a stiff neck as, mild grogginess, and they just quickly dismiss it.
They grab a coffee and move on.
Right. But for the neurodivergent brain, described here, those same minor stimuli are amplified into a blaring, inescapable physiological crisis.
That sounds exhausting.
It's beyond exhausting. The nervous system is interpreting a slightly sticky face not as a nuisance, but as a literal systemic emergency.
Okay, but I want to push back on another detail the author includes here because honestly, it seems totally contradictory to me.
Ooh, part.
They talk about waking up with a clear head. They describe jolting awake in a state of intense hyperarousal, where their mind is perfectly clear, but they claim this is actually more painful than the physical grogginess.
Ah, yes.
Like, I struggle to square that circle. If you struggle with executive dysfunction and brain fog all the time, wouldn't waking up with a crystal clear head be the holy grail?
I mean, it sounds ideal, right? Until you consider the mechanics of cognitive buffering.
Cognitive buffering.
Yeah. So when we transition from sleep to wakefulness normally, there's a gradual ramping up of the default mode network and your executive functions.
Like a dimmer switch.
Exactly. It's a biological dimmer switch.
Yeah.
Waking up in a state of hyperarousal with a clear head means that dimmer switch is broken.
Oh, I see.
The floodgates of conscious awareness just blast open entirely unbuffered.
Ah, so it's a bottleneck issue.
Exactly, a bottleneck issue.
It's like turning on a high-end computer, right? And instead of quietly loading the operating system in the background, you have 50 heavy applications, like video editors, huge spreadsheets, a browser with 100 tabs.
All trying to open at once.
Yes, all hard-coded to launch at the exact millisecond the power connects. The processor might be fast, but that instantaneous, unsequenced data dump is going to completely freeze the system.
You get the spinning wheel of death before you even touch the mouse.
Exactly. How do you even begin to process that?
You don't. That is precisely the mechanism happening here. The brain possesses the clarity to see every single obligation, every social interaction, every dreaded chore for the entire day.
But it can't order them.
Right. It lacks the immediate executive sequencing to prioritize them. All 50 applications demand active RAM simultaneously.
That's terrifying.
It is. And that internal system crash cannot remain internalized forever, you know?
Yeah.
The overwhelming friction between the demands of reality and the brain's capacity to process them has to find an exit vector.
It has to leak out somehow.
Yes. It inevitably manifests externally.
Which perfectly transitions into this remarkably raw example the text provides about the author's father.
Right, the father who possesses very strong ADHD and ASD traits.
Yeah, and we see how this internal system crash dictates his morning behavior. He's described as incredibly grumpy, just blunt to the point of hostility, and utterly unwilling to greet anyone in the house.
He just radiates this intense antisocial negativity.
Exactly. And a surface-level analysis might just write him off as a miserable morning person, right? Like, oh, dad's just cranky before his coffee.
But filtering his behavior through the lens of neurodivergent sensory overload reframes it entirely.
Because it's not just crankiness.
No, we are looking at a crude but highly effective biological defense mechanism.
A defense mechanism against the 50 acts opening at once.
Exactly. When the internal circuitry is operating at 110% capacity, just trying to process the interceptive alarms, the sticky face, the breathing, and the hyper-aroused data dump we just discussed.
Something's got to give.
Right. The amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, it just hijacks the system.
So the grumpiness isn't an emotion, it's a shield.
Yes. The refusal to say good morning is a way of throwing up a concrete wall to block out any additional incoming stimuli.
Because if you speak to him, that's just another application his frozen computer has to open.
That's exactly the case. Social interaction requires massive computational power.
I never really thought about it like that, but it's true. You have to parse the tone, figure out what they mean.
You have to formulate a culturally appropriate response, manage your facial expressions, which is often referred to as masking.
Right, masking. So his bluntness is basically an involuntary unmasking.
A desperate attempt to conserve metabolic energy. And the author recognizes this dynamic in themselves, too.
Yeah, the text highlights how individuals with developmental disabilities face this chronic, high-friction state constantly, and that cascades into really severe secondary struggles.
Like chronic workplace difficulties.
Fractured interpersonal relationships.
And an incredibly high susceptibility to clinical depression.
Which is just heartbreaking. Waking up carrying the weight of clinical depression obviously makes every single one of those morning sensory hurdles exponentially higher.
The compounding effect is brutal.
It really is. But the text zeroes in on one specific driver of this constant friction, and that's executive dysfunction.
Right.
They point to the absolute inability to foresee the future, to sequence tasks logically, and process overwhelming information.
Yes, the temporal discounting is severe here.
Temporal discounting, what's that?
To an ADHD brain, a task is either happening now or not now.
Oh, wow. There's no middle ground.
Exactly. So breaking down a massive long-term project into sequential executable steps, that requires an immense amount of prefrontal cortex engagement.
And if that area of the brain is already exhausted from merely waking up,
Then a messy room doesn't look like a series of small chores. It looks like an insurmountable monolithic wall.
you literally can't see the individual socks on the floor. You just see messes. So putting all these pieces together, the physiological distress signals, the unbuffered data dump, the inability to easily sequence time, the heavy weight of secondary depression,
The father's reaction stops looking like bad behavior, doesn't it?
it starts looking like sheer logic. Like if
Yeah.
your brain literally cannot break down the surrounding chaos calmly, then frantically rubbing your eyes, scowling, and snapping at people is a perfectly natural biological response.
To an entirely unnatural amount of mental friction.
Yes.
It is a highly adaptive response to a hostile internal environment,
So the critical pivot the author makes here, and I think this is where the text gets incredibly practical, is accepting a hard neurological truth.
which is that you cannot easily change the neurobiology.
Right. If the brain's default response to the morning is a system freeze, sheer willpower is a useless tool. You can't just try harder.
Trying harder just burns out the processor faster.
Exactly. So the author's solution is this masterstroke of systemic thinking. You don't try to rewire the brain, you completely re-engineer the external environment to do the thinking for you.
Offloading the processing power to the physical space itself,
Yes. And they utilize this concept they refer to as DUSEN.
which translates loosely to action paths or flow lines.
Action paths. I love that term. So if the neurodivergent brain, or honestly any burnt out brain, freezes when confronted with a macro chore like clean the bedroom, the strategy is radical dispersal.
Dispersing the chores.
Right. You create these hyper-specific points throughout the entire house where tasks are completed in micro increments, almost by accident, rather than tackling them as massive standalone projects.
The brilliance of the action path is how it manipulates kinetic momentum.
Kinetic momentum.
Yeah, to bypass task initiation friction.
Okay, unpack task initiation friction for us.
Task initiation is simply the act of transitioning from a resting state to an active state. And it is incredibly expensive metabolically for someone with executive dysfunction.
Like getting off the couch is the hardest part.
Exactly. Once you're up, it's easier, but starting is agonizing. So the text gives these fascinating, mundane examples that completely alter the affordances of the environment.
The laundry basket placement is my absolute favorite example of this.
It's so smart.
Instead of keeping it hidden in a closet or tucked in the corner of a bedroom, they put it directly in the middle of the hallway.
Right in the way.
Yes, and the logic is flawless. Because as you're walking from the bedroom to the bathroom, you're already in motion. You have kinetic momentum.
So you just undress and drop the clothes into the basket without breaking stride.
Exactly. You never had to initiate doing the laundry. You just dropped it while walking.
Or placing a small stand right by the door of the room, holding a duster and the AC remote.
Yes, that one too.
The environmental design dictates that you grab them with the physical momentum of returning from the toilet. So you end up wiping down the desk as a byproduct of simply walking past it.
It's brilliant. And they also talk about hanging the keys on the bathroom mirror.
Another crucial data point, putting the keys in your pocket while brushing your teeth.
Now wait, doesn't that challenge our traditional understanding of multitasking? Because normally we're told multitasking splits your attention and increases cognitive load, which leads to stress.
It usually does. However, the author is engineering what they call mini multitasking to solve a very specific vulnerability.
Okay, what's the vulnerability?
Well, the text notes that two distinct things cause them immense stress: doing it all at once and blank spaces.
Let's dissect the blank spaces concept, because in standard productivity advice, downtime or a pause between tasks is highly encouraged.
Usually. Yeah, we're told to take a breath.
Exactly. So why is a blank space a trigger for distress in this specific framework?
Because a blank space requires a restart.
Oh.
Think about it. If you finish task A, take a break, and then need to start task B, your brain has to fire up the initiation sequence all over again.
You have to drum up the motivation from zero.
You have to sequence the steps, execute the transition. It's exhausting.
So by dispersing these tasks, the author calls them side, or while I'm at it, actions along natural walking paths. You basically eradicate the blank space.
You never actually initiate a new chore. You are simply continuing the kinetic momentum of existing in your space.
It fundamentally changes the geometry of living. It's like, okay, it's like designing a pinball machine.
Oh, like that. A pinball machine.
Yeah, because when you play pinball, you aren't manually steering the silver ball into every single target. That would require impossible precision and speed.
You just lose constantly.
Right. Instead, you design the playfield. You angle the bumpers and position the ramps so that merely launching the ball guarantees it will bounce off the right targets and score points.
That's a highly accurate analogy.
You don't force yourself to clean the house through willpower. You arrange the bumpers of your home so that walking from the bed to the kitchen naturally cleans the environment along the way.
You are building environmental affordances that make success the path of least resistance. However, a perfectly engineered physical environment can only mitigate external friction.
Oh, right. Because we still have the brain to deal with.
Exactly. You can have the best pinball bumpers in the world effortlessly dropping laundry into the hallway basket. But if your internal monologue is actively hostile, the morning is still going to collapse.
Which brings us to the author's second major strategy, managing the internal audio track.
Yes.
And I want to be clear for the listener, this isn't about generic, toxic, positive thinking, like just smile and have a great day.
No, not at all. It's a highly specific physical action.
Right. The author heavily advocates for the mechanical act of vocalization, physically speaking out loud while executing these action paths.
They suggest muttering phrases like yash yash.
Which translates to something like there, or okay, right, a self-soothing phrase.
Exactly. And this vocalization scales up to a very specific operational mantra.
The mantra, yes.
They train themselves to say out loud, "It can't be helped, I have a developmental disability, so this happens automatically."
Now, I have to be honest here. When I first read the source text, I hit a massive wall with this specific tactic.
Really? Why?
Well, muttering, "It can't be helped, my disability makes this happen automatically," sounds incredibly defeatist on its face.
I can see how it sounds that way.
It sounds like a surrender of agency. How does the author reconcile chanting what sounds like an excuse with their intense drive to actually conquer their mornings?
It's actually the absolute inverse of defeatism. It is radical strategic uncoupling.
Uncoupling from what?
From the moral failing. Look, when a neurodivergent individual stares at a messy room, the default cognitive loop is deeply moralized.
Like, I'm a bad person.
Exactly. The room is messy because I am lazy, I am broken, I am a failure.
Wow, yeah.
And that shame spiral consumes massive, massive amounts of cognitive RAM.
It's like having a virus running in the background of that computer we talked about.
Perfect analogy. By vocalizing, this happens automatically due to my neurobiology. The author severs the link between their self-worth and their systemic output.
They're externalizing the blame to the hardware.
Yes. It shifts the internal narrative from a moral failing to a mechanical reality.
So it's not an excuse to do nothing. It's a diagnostic statement that physically stops the shame spiral from freezing the system.
Precisely.
But why must it be vocalized? Why can't they just think it? To me, it feels like an anchor. Because, the default mode network in an ADHD brain loves to time travel.
I'd love to time travel.
Right. Spinning out into anxieties about a conversation from 5 years ago or a deadline 3 weeks away. So actually engaging the vocal cords and hearing your own voice feels like a hack to forcefully tether that wandering mind to the present physical second.
You've hit on the exact neurological mechanism there.
Really?
Yes. Silent thought loops easily get lost in the noise of a hyper-aroused brain. Vocalization, however, is a complex mechanical process.
It takes actual effort.
A lot of effort. It requires motor planning in the brain's language centers, the physical actuation of the diaphragm and vocal cords, and then auditory processing as your ears receive the sound waves.
It creates a closed loop.
A closed motor auditory feedback loop, exactly. It forces the brain to dedicate processing power to the immediate present.
That is so cool.
It is. By muttering these reassurances while moving through their physical action paths, they are simultaneously lowering environmental friction and auditorily reinforcing their own grace.
It's a highly resilient coping mechanism.
Extremely resilient.
But, okay, there is a glaring prerequisite for this entire system to function.
The clutter.
The clutter. For those kinetic action paths to work, and for that momentum to carry you through the hallway while you mutter your mantras, the path has to be clear.
Right, you can't walk a path that doesn't exist.
Exactly. You can't rely on momentum if you trip over a stack of Amazon boxes on your way to the bathroom. The physical space must be devoid of friction.
Which inevitably leads to the author's final and arguably most foundational strategy.
Extreme decluttering.
Or danshari, as they refer to it. And the author provides a deeply astute analysis of how neurodivergent populations interact with physical objects.
It's wild, the extremes they describe.
It really is. They observe a sharp polarization in cleanliness habits. Individuals with developmental disabilities often swing to extremes.
Right.
They're either hyper-organized to the point of rigid, exhausting perfectionism,
Sure.
or they suffer from severe clutter blindness, entirely failing to notice the accumulating mess until it reaches a critical, unmanageable mass.
Clutter blindness, that's such a real thing. You literally stop seeing the piles until one day you trip over them.
Exactly.
And when that clutter blindness finally lifts, the resulting realization isn't just, oh, I should tidy up. It's an overwhelming, monumental crisis.
Because of the executive dysfunction we talked about earlier.
Right. We've established that this specific brain architecture freezes when confronted with massive, multi-step tasks. So how do they bypass the freeze response when confronted with a hoarder-level mess?
The author breaks down a decluttering tactic so radically simplified it borders on genius.
The three-box method.
The three-box method. And its efficacy is entirely rooted in constraint.
Constraint, okay.
The author dictates that the absolute only task for the day, the singular demand placed on the executive function, is to procure 3 cardboard boxes and label them.
Keep, discard, and decide later.
Yes. That is the entire scope of the initiation phase.
The decide later box is the linchpin of this whole operation, isn't it?
Well, without a doubt.
Because in a standard decluttering scenario, when you pick up an item, say an old HDMI cable or a book you meant to read, you are forced to make a permanent, definitive judgment right then and there.
Do I need this?
Yeah.
What if I buy a monitor that requires it, but I haven't used it in 3 years?
Exactly. The cognitive load of forecasting the future utility of a single cable is staggering. Multiply that by 1,000 items in a messy room.
That is the textbook definition of decision fatigue.
Right.
It's localized in the anterior cingulate cortex, which weighs options and conflicts. For someone with ASD or ADHD, every single object requires a grueling, emotional, and logical algorithmic assessment.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It is. Decision fatigue paralyzes the processor, but the decide later box functions as a cognitive quarantine zone.
Quarantine zone, I love that.
It completely bypasses the friction of uncertainty. If the item doesn't elicit an immediate keep or discard response, you don't force the processor to stall.
You just toss it in the third box.
You quarantine the decision, drop the item in the third box, and maintain the kinetic momentum of the physical cleanup.
You separate the physical act of sorting from the cognitive heavy lifting of deciding. That is so smart.
It's incredibly efficient.
And to fuel the momentum of actually filling that discard box, the author taps into a highly recognizable neurodivergent coping mechanism, don't they?
Dopamine chasing.
Yes. Dopamine chasing. They hyperfixate on the dopamine hit they will receive by selling the discarded items.
They use the promise of cash to buy a highly desired hyperfixation item as the raw fuel to push through the chore.
But the author is acutely aware of the danger of this dopamine loop, because if left unchecked, you're just trading one mess for another.
Exactly. You simply replace a massive pile of old clutter with a slightly newer pile of hyperfixation clutter.
Which defeats the whole purpose of the action paths.
Right. To prevent this, they implement a draconian, non-negotiable physical rule.
What's the rule?
Any new item brought into the ecosystem must be physically smaller and fewer in number than the aggregate volume of the items discarded.
Wow, that is strict. But honestly, this detail totally recontextualizes the minimalist lifestyle for me.
How so?
While minimalism within the framework of this source text is stripped entirely of its aesthetic pretension, it has absolutely nothing to do with making a living room look sleek for Instagram.
Oh, no, not at all.
It is a strict medical and cognitive necessity.
The text explicitly outlines that a minimal physical environment directly reduces brain strain
It curtails violent irritability.
and physically stops wandering thoughts.
Returning to our initial discussion of the afterimage of yesterday, if visual clutter is the sensory trigger that launches the panic cascade.
Then extreme minimalism is the systematic eradication of those triggers.
Right, because every single object in a room is a data point demanding visual processing.
Every object requires maintenance, sequencing, or physical navigation.
By radically shrinking the volume of physical possessions, you are literally lowering the base computational load required simply to exist inside your own home.
It's a survival tactic.
It really is. So, synthesizing this entire journey, the author brings us to a profoundly moving turning point.
Yeah, the ending of the text is incredibly powerful.
It is. By accepting that morning misery was a hard-coded reality of their specific neurobiology, and by abandoning the futile desire to cure themselves through willpower.
They focused entirely on mitigating the systemic friction.
Right. They built the action paths, they vocalized the acceptance mantras, they ruthlessly quarantined the clutter.
And through that purely mechanical process, the text reveals they achieved something deeply emotional.
What was that?
They finally accepted their identity as a person with a developmental disability.
Wow. That is a phenomenal paradigm shift.
It really is. The internal narrative moved away from a place of deep shame like, how do I force myself to act like a normal person?
To a place of strategic engineering.
Exactly. This is my given hardware. How do I manipulate the mechanics of my environment to conquer this routine?
It transitions the individual from a passive victim of their neurobiology to an active architect of their reality.
Which brings us full circle to the bumps and dents.
Yes. The text concludes with this incredibly empowering thesis on the neurodiversity paradigm.
It acknowledges that the dents, the sensory overloads, the executive dysfunctions, the morning paralysis, they may indeed be inferior traits that cause immense friction.
But the bumps, the capacity for intense hyperfocus, the lateral problem-solving, the deep consuming passions, those traits are superior.
The entire purpose of the boxes, the mantras, and the pinball machine environment isn't to become normal.
No, it's simply to build a scaffolding around the dents so they stop dragging down the bumps.
If you can systematically manage the friction of your vulnerabilities, you liberate all of that trapped metabolic energy.
Allowing your unique strengths to actually dictate the trajectory of your life.
And as we established at the beginning, this structural philosophy applies universally.
Diagnosis or not, we all possess a unique topography of bumps and dents.
We all experience mornings where our executive function is entirely depleted and our environment feels actively hostile.
We all boot up to the after image of yesterday at some point.
We do.
But the physics of the solution remain the same across the board. Lower the environmental friction, engineer kinetic momentum, and aggressively, vocally give yourself grace.
It's a blueprint for a better life.
It truly is. So, based on the architectural genius we've unpacked today, I want to leave you with a final thought to examine in your own life. If we stop viewing our homes as passive containers that we merely live inside, and start viewing them as external hard drives designed to process information on our behalf, what specific friction point in your daily routine could you physically redesign today to literally think for you tomorrow?